go-to source for news and information was the newspaper. So he took his cause to the Tennessee Press Association, and this was in January 1959, demanding that something be done.
So he obviously feels very strong about this situation, and he knows, which I agree with him, that this might be the only way to get some of these cases properly investigated.
By March 14th of 1951, the governor, Gordon Browning, signed a bill into law establishing the Tennessee Bureau of Criminal Identification, which we know now as the TBI, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. And it was going to work as a plainclothes division for the Department of Safety. And it was renamed Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI, on March 27, 1980.
Yeah, and every state has one now, right?
And since that time, the Bureau has grown into 6 offices across the state, and they help solve crimes using forensics and such. So this newspaper publisher is like the father of the TBI, basically, the founding person, and all springs from JT Lutz's murder.
Yeah, it may have inevitably happened anyway, but he definitely got it done, quicker. They got it going long before, many states knew they had to have this type of investigative arm.
After the shooting, the Lutz family moved in with relatives, and since Christmas was only weeks away, he was murdered December the 6th, so you've got Christmas like 19 days away. The community rallied together to raise about $500 for the family, which at that time was a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
And they were able to keep the family in meals and ensure that the kids had a really good Christmas after losing their dad. On February 22nd of 1950, more than 2 months after JT passed away, Hazel gave birth to their youngest child, James Thomas Lutz Jr., and his nickname was Red. Hazel Lutz died in 1981. She never remarried after her husband was murdered.
So it was the love of her life, the father of all her children.
The 7 kids did grow up to lead productive lives, although I'm sure the unsolved murder of their father always loomed. They were just this poor, modest family. Who would want them dead?
Well, honestly, I think just from what little evidence that they have about it, that there definitely might be a connection to the, given evidence in a trial against someone for theft. Someone got that mad about that they killed a man in cold blood, injured his wife, and took away a father of all those kids.
Really sad story, but if we're looking for a silver lining in it all, it's amazing to think that this is the case that really sparked getting the TBI instituted, and then think of all the good work that they've been able to do.
Oh, I'm sure they solved many murders that would not have been solved or helped with the many different cases of violence. Yeah, that's crazy. And I always think it's extra sad when someone loses a loved one to violence like this near a big holiday. Don't you?
It is very sad.
Yeah, I mean, with all the holidays and birthdays, it's going to be near one of the dates. But anytime it's the big ones, Christmas, Thanksgiving, or on their birthday or someone's birthday, I mean, that's just super sad. That's all they're going to remember on that day of celebration.
Well, poor Hazel, she's expecting her 7th child with this man.
Oh,
and
very
he's murdered
pregnant.
2 months before the baby comes.
What do you do with that? And back then, there's not much support. There's not many organizations that, help. Well, you had community. That's when you still had real community, and they rallied around this family and did what they could for them. Oh, my God, that was so sad.
Well, moving on, we're going to talk about a case now, discuss this case that we covered on Patreon.
Okay, let's do it.
For our patrons. It's in Tennessee as well. Betty Jean Necessary was a 12-year-old 6th grader who is described as a good student at Kingsley Elementary School and was overall a good kid. She was the kind of kid that always said yes, sir, to the principal, and though she was only 12, she looked 16. We see that a lot.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome last name, too.
Necessary?
Yeah, don't you think that's cool?
Betty Jean was tall, slender, and had long blonde hair. Boys flirted with her, but she never had a boyfriend. She lived with her family in Bloomingdale, which is a community in Kingsport, Tennessee. On February 26th of 1970, Betty Jean was walking home from school. Normally, Betty Jean walked home with her older sister Patty, who was 2 years older, but on this particular day, her family had come down with the flu, and Betty Jean was the only member of the family who didn't get sick, so she had gone on to school that day.
So she's normally with someone, being safer, and the one time she's not.
On the walk walk home, she joined two friends from the neighborhood, and she would often hang out with these girls, so it wasn't uncommon for her to spend the afternoon at their house and then return home in time for supper.
Yeah, that's because of the way me and you were talking the other day, how kids were always outside, out the door, off somewhere playing, down at a friend's house, vice versa. Yeah, always outside.
These girls had a baby at their house. It was a relative, I believe maybe like a cousin or something. So Betty Jean had stopped by their home on her walk home because she had wanted to see this baby.
Well, who doesn't want to squeeze the baby?
She stayed for about 30 minutes, and she had begged one of the other girls to walk her the rest of the way home because, as I mentioned, she always had her older sister with her, and she just didn't really feel comfortable walking from their house to her house because she had to take a shortcut down a gravel road that was surrounded by woods. It just gave her the creeps.
Yeah, sounds like a creepy shortcut you shouldn't take.
Normally, her sister would be with her. She just did not want to go by herself. But for whatever reason, the neighbor didn't want to go with Betty Jean.
Well, I mean, from their viewpoint, they'd have to walk back by themselves through the same creepiness. So, I mean, you can't really blame them for that.
It was around 3:40 p.m. when another neighbor saw Betty Jean walking down the gravel road, and she was about 200 yards from her house. Betty Jean never arrived home. Now, her mother was not incredibly concerned about Betty Jean's whereabouts. Again, she would often go hang out with the neighbor girls, play, hang out, be home in time for supper.
Right.
Bloomingdale was a pretty safe place, and she knew her daughter was likely just hanging out with her friends, but when dark rolled around, Mrs. Necessary grew concerned.
Yeah, before the day of constant contact with cell phones, texting and such, people had a bigger window. You had more leeway before people worried about you.
It's dark. She knows her daughter is not a big fan of being out after dark. She's usually home by dinner. She's concerned. She calls the neighbors. When she finds out that her daughter isn't at the neighbor's house, she calls police. A search ensued for Betty Jean. Now, she had left home wearing a brown floral top, some bell-bottom pants, and a blue coat. They are combing the area, trying to find this young girl. With Betty Jean missing, the entire area is concerned.
Yeah, well, how could they not be? You know, you got a young person. They're all of a sudden just gone in a place where this type of thing never happens. So, yeah, you don't know what's going on. You don't know who's out there or what they're doing. It's very scary.
In the past few months leading up to Betty Jean's disappearance, 3 other girls had gone missing in Tennessee, including in Knoxville and Nashville.
Well, I mean, those areas are good distance apart, but still, it seems to be some kind of pattern.
Well, Kingsport is not that far away from Knoxville.
Yeah, but I mean, Nashville is a good ways,
well,
right?
Right. But there had been other missing girls in Tennessee, so police were concerned.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's potential for some type of pattern, someone moving around preying on young girls.
Searchers began combing the woods where Betty Jean was last seen, behind the home, around the neighbors' houses, but they didn't find her. What they did find were some school books scattered in a deep gully about 100 feet off the gravel road where she had been walking. But by Saturday, searchers discover a hand sticking up out of a shallow grave. The grave was underneath a rock formation, which some people might call a cave.
Oh, okay.
Her body was nude. Her clothes were found a few feet away. She had been gagged and tied up, and she had 4 gunshot wounds.
Some monster just attacked her. That's just so horrible.
A suspect was brought in, a man who had been shooting in the area, and questioned. Now, the man was known around Bloomingdale as he had lived on and off in the area. Fred Bowen was a 25-year-old unemployed married man who was visiting his in-laws in Bloomingdale. Bowen had a criminal history, but it hadn't been anything violent. He had charges for giving alcohol to an underage girl and burglary. He had done time in reform school and possibly prison, but I couldn't find any exact documentation about that. It was mostly just noted that he had maybe served some time in prison. He and his young wife, her name was Sandra, and they'd been only married for a little over a year, 13 months, had driven from Indianapolis to Kingsport to visit her parents and grandmother. He had been a painter, but wasn't working currently, so that's why the couple had some time to visit family. On the Thursday that Betty Jean went missing, Fred had scratches and a cut on his head and face. He tells investigators his wife hit him with a purse and scratched him, But an inspection of his wife's fingernails show that she was a nail biter and had them bitten down into the quick. There's really no way she could have scratched her husband.
Yeah, what kind of purse does she have? Shit. You know, I mean, most purses aren't going to scratch your damn face. I guess maybe have a big buckle or something on it.
Purse of doom.
Yeah, it's black and it has
razor
spikes
blades
and razor blades sticking out of it.
I want that purse.
Yeah, I know you do.
While he was in Kingsport, there was a burglary at Kingsley Elementary School, just a few feet away from the Chadwell Road residence where his wife's grandmother lived. During a search, deputies found part of the loot that he had stolen hidden in her outhouse.
Well, damn, dude. So he's unemployed. I like that description, unemployed married man, which I don't know how you pull that off for long. And he's just going back to his burglary ways to make a little money, right? Because they're traveling. I mean, you got to have money to travel.
Eventually, he's going to be charged with rape and murder of Betty Jean. He snatched her from the gravel road, dragged her through the woods to a clearing where he raped her, and then he shot her 4 times. Betty Jean was still alive when he buried her in the shallow grave.
That's horrible. I mean, I just don't understand how a human can treat another human like that.
On the stand, Bowen said he'd come to Kingsport to try and sell $7,000 worth of diamonds.
Oh, so now he's a jewel thief.
He had an appointment at a jewelry store but couldn't remember the guy's name. He said he had stolen diamonds in Indianapolis. He claimed he had a history of mental issues and he had had some brain injuries from bicycle and car accidents and also a fall from a 22-step stairway.
Okay.
And he admitted to blacking out at points in his life.
Well, frontal lobe damage.
We hear that
there you go.
Quite a lot when it comes to serial killers, murderers. Like, that comes up a lot in true crime. Traumatic brain injuries, and especially when you're a child and have one.
Yep.
You lean toward that violence.
Yeah, I know. I still don't. I mean, even if so, your inhibitions and your decision making and
lack of impulse control.
Yeah, but I don't understand why you got those impulses. I mean, there's got to be some other element to it that's not so known to scientists or whatever. Because just because you can't, I mean, I could see you like spending too much money, not able to stick to a budget, drinking too much, making poor decisions with drugs, or driving a car when you shouldn't. I mean, those seem, but fucking killing some young girl, I don't have those impulses anyway. I mean, it's very strange, but it's very common. It's very common in serial killers that kill over and over.
A boot print was found near the cave where Betty Jean was buried. A pair of boots belonging to Bowen were found on his mother-in-law's property with clay mud matching that near the cave. At trial, he testified for about 50 minutes. He was found guilty and initially sentenced to the death penalty. Evidence included some sweater fibers found on Betty Jean's gag, belonging to a sweater in Bowen's suitcase. There were also blood stains on the sweater. There was a gun Bowen had purchased several days before the murder that matched the weapon used in her killing.
Well, it doesn't look good.
The defense claimed the boots were planted.
Oh, okay, the boots and the sweater and the fibers, and he just happened to buy a gun that was the same caliber.
Anytime I hear evidence has been planted or like the boots were planted, I think someone's gone out in the yard and like dug a hole and put them in there. Like, oh, look, the boots have been planted.
Oh,
but
this boot bush is going to grow right here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bowen also tried to blame the murder on his brother-in-law.
Well, yeah, why not? I guess somebody made him steal from the elementary school and stick that. You know, we're looking at this from, you know, years later, and but it doesn't look good, honestly. I mean, he looks kind of guilty.
At one point, Bowen was the only white man on Tennessee's death row. His death penalty sentence was eventually overturned. He was given 99 years in prison instead. He was turned down 4 times for parole. He died in 2006 due to medical issues. In an interview with a newspaper, Patty Powell, that's Betty Jean's sister, said that Bowen had died of cancer.
Well, you know, there was strong enough evidence presented to the, you know, in the case and to the court and to the parole board. They did not want to let this guy out, so I think they might have made the right call there.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the evidence they had definitely pointed to his guilt.
And I think he possibly harmed another young girl somewhere else and never got caught for it.
Are you ready to get into our final true crime case of the day.
Yeah, I'm pissed off, man. I want to kick that guy's ass. I wish I could have saved that little girl.
We're still in Tennessee.